Testing. Testing. Okay. In this stream or video, depending on how you're viewing it, we will be covering some select matches from my performance in the Superqual, where I won. So that qualified me for the Strixhaven Championship, and I played this deck. So it's Esper Vial, with the most recent addition being Deafening Silence, and this made it into the list because I remembered that it was good against Doomsday, and it's also good against Storm, which actually was my loss for the day. So this helps against a lot of matchups where Esper Vial's overwhelming fair advantage does not apply. So this kind of shores up some of those matchups that are closer to the 50-50 mark, making them back to like an advantageous matchup. Okay. So the first match we're going to look at because I lost, and so it's always good to look at your losses to see like if anything bad happened that you can learn from. Okay, so the first decision of any consequence that I made was to keep. And at the time I thought, okay, so 7 forces, 4 Meddling Mage, 1 Tidehollow Sculler. And then those are like the main things you want to hit when you know you're playing against Tess. And then there's also kind of auxiliary draws like, okay, well, if a Baleful Strix is kind of like, you know, better than a Swords to Plowshares, a Recruiter still counts for something because that promises to be a mage on turn 4, or a Sculler. A Venser still counts for something because it disrupts on turn 4. A Plague Engineer still counts for something because my opponent might all-in me with Empty the Warren. So there's like a lot of auxiliary considerations, but the primary consideration is how many forces do I have and how many mages do I have. So this hand scores 1 out of 11 possible main hits, and an average hand would have scored 1 as well. So it seems a little greedy to me to try to score 2 instead, especially because out of 6 cards, well, I mean, it's equally likely in your next hand to get 2 forces and 2 blues, but that's just in general not all that likely. This deck has, I think, 29 blues, was it? Let me double check that. That's a number I should know by heart, but I forgot. 4, 5, 10, 14. Yep, 29. Okay, so I was correct. So it has 29 blues, so it's just like not very likely, and here you can see a proof of that. So this isn't quite right, because you need to condition on having drawn 2 forces, but I'll just look at this anyway. Okay, so 21%. Because the question is more like, no, the question is, what's the probability that I draw 2 forces and 2 blues? So it's actually going to be less than this because 2 of the blues have to be specified to be among 7 cards. So I think you need something that's more advanced called the multivariate hypergeometric distribution, and I haven't found a good calculator for that. So if you know one, let me know. But with only one variate, you can't calculate that. So then we know it's less than 21%, which is enough because we're not going to mold this hand looking for less than 21% on getting 2 forces. So what else could be better? Like force plus a mage? Yeah, that would be better. Again, you need the multivariate geometric distribution, hypergeometric distribution to calculate that. But you can see like it's not going to be very good. Even just asking in general to draw 2 out of 11 in 7 cards, that's only 25%, right? So, and it could just as easily be 0. I think, like, just as easily. Is it just as easily? Okay, so it's actually slightly more easily. Could it be 0? So I think keeping this was okay. I mean, people think in terms of like sort of discrete black and white statements like, oh, Storm combo doesn't lose to just 1 force of will. But you see how I didn't draw like a great hand here. Like sometimes Storm combo also gets a middling hand. Like, oh, okay, I have a turn 1 go off, but it's not protected. Should I keep it? I think Bryant would say, obviously yes, but I'm not sure about that. So you can ask Bryant. But I think that Storm players should keep a hand like that, and they should just fire it off in force check. They'll win more than 50% of the time, which is more than they could hope for when playing against this deck. So, so I think if you get a force check hand, you just keep it and you fire it. So not every hand is going to be like turn 1 go off, and then I also have veil protection, or even turn 2 go off with protection. Like that's not every hand. So in fact, it's actually not most hands. So keeping this, like what is true is that Tess could resist counter magic, but it has to slow down to do so. It can get lucky hands where it does not have to slow down to do so, but on average, it has to make a trade-off between speed and protection. So sometimes players will choose, as I know that Bryant often does, to get speed and not protection. And in that case, a hand like this could win me game 1, which is the hardest game of the best of 3. So I chose to keep, and I do not regret that, though I lost for it. So I don't think there's really anything else to say here. Let me just scroll through this relatively quick game just to make sure. Oh, there was actually. So I forced the Wishclaw Talisman because this was an unusual turn in that Bryant made it so that if Bryant had Veil, then this was the chance to get him, because if Veil is bad when you need to do something over 2 turns. So like if you need to do something over 2 turns and Veil has to be preemptive, then it's bad. So like let's say you have a Teferi and a Doomsday player is planning like, okay, I'm going to Doomsday and the next turn I'm going to play Thassa's Oracle. Then they have to Veil first because you have Teferi, so they can't wait to see which one you force. And then you just force whichever one they don't Veil first, which means that if they don't Veil Doomsday, you have to force the Doomsday, assuming that they still have Veil. I learned that the hard way. So this is a situation where Bryant needs to do, potentially, like I don't know what's in his hand, but potentially this could be a situation where Bryant needed to combo over 2 turns. And the first of the 2 turns, he needed to expose to Veil, expose to counter magic, not because Teferi is in play, but because he doesn't have the mana. So I thought that there is a good chance that that would be the case. A better chance than that he just doesn't have Veil. And even if he doesn't have Veil, and he has the punish, which would be like, oh, I just had another Wishclaw Talisman. 2 Wishclaw Talisman, 0 Veil, would also beat this hand, even if I don't force it, as long as he has any kind of mana, because I would never seriously consider forcing, like, let's say a Lion's Eye Diamond without a good read that, for some reason, I know that's like the weak link. Because mana is definitely more common than Wishclaw Talisman and Burning Wish, if you want to count that. You can only count Burning Wish also as not even as threatening as Wishclaw Talisman, because Burning Wish has to get either Echo, which is like really random and likely to miss. I think Bryant's website says it's like some insane 30% or something, I don't remember. Or you can get pure Into the Abyss, which costs 7. So it's definitely like Wish Claw Talisman is definitely the more dangerous one, and there's only 4 of those, but there's like infinity mana sources. So Bryant knows this, so he knows like, okay, I'm more likely to counter payoffs than mana. So he might. There's some credibility to the argument that he might, knowing that, like, run out Talisman to knowing how like a rational Esper Vial player would react to that. So it's hard to say, but I did think, and I think I was correct to have the impression that Bryant could likely have a Veil, and that it was necessary to make this his one exposure, even though he has a Veil. So I forced this, and then I drew a Brainstorm and didn't get anything, so now it's kind of like, okay, I hope that was it. I judged it to be not worth wasting here, because I needed to reshuffle that away to get something as soon as possible, but I don't get another turn. Oh, I do, okay. But I drew nothing, so then it didn't matter. Okay, so I do get around to doing the waste. So I guess I kind of like missed a chance to deny Bryant a Brainstorm, because he Brainstormed and then Lotus Petal Wishclaw. So I could have denied the Brainstorm, and maybe that would have also denied the Wishclaw by not wasting. But I think I made the higher probability play, which is something I've been working on accepting. Like, result-oriented thinking isn't good. Probability-oriented thinking is good. Okay, so now I die. Okay, we don't have to watch this. This is pretty textbook. Alright, let's move on to game 2. Oh, well, that's exactly what I was trying to avoid. Okay. Oh my god. Okay, there. Now we get a good look at my first hand. So it's mage only. This is game 2. I'm like armed to the teeth, so I think I can do better than mage only. If this was like Ethersworn Canonist only, I would probably keep, because a turn 1 go off is not that likely, and Ethersworn Canonist is one of the better hates, but it's actually like one of the weakest hates, and only that. So then it's easy to toss this in game 2. So this is much better, and so I keep. Okay, so that's like the first significant decision. I think everything else I did up to this point was like pretty obvious. So here there's several arguments to make. So I think naming Burning Wish is just out. I don't think I would do that. And the two main ones are Veil and Wishclaw Talisman. So Wishclaw Talisman is like obvious. We discussed that. I mean, it's obvious that would be one of the options. We discussed that for game 1. But Veil is also an option because I have a Force, and it usually if you catch Storm, if you like counter them, they lose everything. Like if you do it right, you don't just counter, like when you know that you're not going to get Veiled, you don't have to just counter like the first payoff. Like you wait till they like Dark Ritual ad nauseum, and then you force that, and then they're hellbent. So you could go for a greedier line like that, but I saw that potentially backfiring if my opponent had a Thoughtseize or a Defense Grid, or if they had 2 Wishclaw Talismans, or even like 1 Wishclaw, 1 Burning Wish, or 2 Burning Wish, or something like that. Like Burning Wish isn't useless, it's just not quite as good as Wishclaw Talisman, I would think. So I thought that, especially given that mere survival of turn 2 ensured that I'm going to continue a stream of meddling mages, that it's better to make sure I don't have to force, rather than that I try to make sure force is effective. Because If I make sure I don't have to force, then I think that extends the likelihood of me living another turn to be more likely. Because Veil is more easily replaceable than not in terms of like strict numbers, but in terms of well, I'll say that Veil is more easily replaceable in general than Witch Call Talisman, because there's like there's Defense Grid, there's Thoughtseize, and and then there's like still more Witch Call Talismans functionally acts like a Veil, but then there's but if you name Witch Call Talisman, that just kind of deals with the whole thing. Okay, so we see that my opponent has actually missed a land drop here. So anyway, okay, so that time I named Veil of Summer because I already named Wish Call Talisman, and I wasn't really afraid of Burning Wish after my opponent missed a land drop. Wish Call Talisman I wasn't really afraid of either, but I didn't know my opponent was going to miss a land drop, so I named Veil because at this point, when you're missing land drops and Brainstorm locked, then what's going to kill me is like Dark Ritual ad nauseum or something, and then I'm not going to name ad nauseum, right? So I just want to make sure, like, since my opponent can't cast Defense Grid anyway, and Thoughtseize is like a whole turn, I just want to make sure, like, okay, they're not going to go off next turn, then I can play the third mage. So the missed land drop was definitely information that I cared about. Okay, so now back to naming Witch Call Talisman, because, like, I mean, what else is there to name? Okay, so now I'm blocking Echo. Okay. I don't think there's much to learn from that one. Our opponent just didn't draw very well, and we drew fine. We had Mulligan, but that's nothing compared to getting locked at one land the way Bryant did. Okay, so here, I think this is an easy keep. We've got Force, and we've got a reasonable follow-up play on turn 2. And we have Wasteland. That's like a little epsilon more than something else. Sound quality is bad? Sound quality is bad? That's interesting. Sound quality is bad? That's interesting. Sound quality. Okay, how about now? Okay, how about now? Okay, how about now? Okay, so there should never have been any echo because, so there should never have... I mean, there's going to be echo now because I'm listening in, but there should never be any echo when I've muted myself. Because the way echo happens, I think, is that it goes from my speakers to my mic. So if my speakers don't make any sound, then it should be fine. Okay. I don't think I can make this any louder. How would you do that? I mean, it's already... Okay, yeah, you can. Okay. So, yeah, easy keep. I actually did not expect to lose this with a hand like this. Like, this isn't, like, some god hand. Like, I didn't open with Deafening Silence ever this match. But this is good enough to the point where, looking back, I don't actually remember how I was killed here. And it's like, wait, how's he going to do it? Because this is not bad. So, let's find out. Maybe it was like some early Veil. Oh yeah, I remember. It was an early Veil protected go off or something like that. Okay. Oh right. Defense grid. Okay. So unfortunately, I learned an important lesson here, which is reflected in my notes. So if a deck can go off before turn 3 and you're on the draw, then you do not want to keep more than one Prince. I was thinking, there's always this debate against combo deck, like, do I want, like, some sort of, like, half a card type of card, like Prince, or do I want a dead blue card, like Gilded Drake? And when you're not going to be able to see the scries off of Prince, then you want the Gilded Drake. So I actually lost here because of that. So that's the lesson. So yeah, sometimes this happens. You don't really expect it, but you can be more ready for it by having Drake instead of Prince. Notice that there's no way I could have interjected differently here to not die. Even if I did nothing or forced the Dark Ritual, I would have died. Forcing the Dark Ritual would have been best, but that would have still left me against 14 tokens. So yeah, this was a done deal when my opponent decided, like, oh, I'm going to empty the warrants for a lot on turn 2. So yeah, scrying for Plague Engineer and then not finding it, so GG. Okay, yeah, I don't find it. Okay, so this match I'm showing you even though I won, because, and even though I don't have, like, a big takeaway lesson from this, because I think it might have a takeaway lesson for the viewers, which is how you can play against control decks. I know a lot of people were not understanding, like, necessarily how to beat Snow back when that was a thing, like thinking you might lose to Oko or something like that. So it requires a lot of, like, willingness to deviate from a set plan, or at least a having, like, sort of many plans available that might apply at any given time, as you'll see in Game 1. Also, another reason I'm viewing this is because I may realize, once I start watching, that actually there is something to learn. Okay, so that's actually a significant decision right there. I do not know what my opponent's playing right now, other than that they probably were playing some kind of blue pile. So to put the Aether Vial back was a decision I had to make without knowing whether or not I might get Abrupt Decayed or Teferi bounced on my Vial. I decided that it was acceptable to take this risk, and a sort of compromise was that I would keep the Force for tempo, and if absolutely necessary, I could actually use it to protect the Vial unless it's Abrupt Decay, which my opponent has locked themselves out of casting on turn 2. So I thought, like, okay, this is probably acceptable. We can get rid of the Vial, and we get rid of the land too, because my opponent's probably not playing land destruction, and with all this draw in my hand, I'm going to draw more lands. And even if I don't, it's okay. Hold on. Okay. Okay, so this is like, I don't remember if this is something I was explicitly playing around. I think it was. I think I thought of that. Okay, so you'll notice that I chose to let both of those permanents resolve. So yeah, I typically do not respect library,
even if it comes from a deck with Uro in it, because I have so many answers to Uro, I just don't expect it to go critical. If it goes critical, it should go critical under my control. So I usually think, like, also I have enough pressure, just the same way I was able to kill Oko. Like, library players should know better than to pay, like, 12 life. And if they only pay 8, it's like a draw 2 that leaves a permanent behind on the board. Like, So obviously there's some times when it's like something really bad happens, like I get Terminus or something, and then I don't have any pressure, and then the library player pays like 20 life. But in that case, it can occasionally be the case that forcing the library would have been better, but it's just not very likely to happen that way. Especially because I have Vial, it's implying a lot of pressure, so I don't think I should respect library here. Okay, so why did I reveal that I was... Another thing I remember thinking here was, I'm also going to bounce it, but I end up letting it resolve later. So a delayed library is like terrible, because you're taking damage while that's happening, your opponent's board is developing. And library is similar to standstill in that you have to be ahead for it to be useful. So a trick like this just puts my opponent behind. So why did I play Wasteland? To play on carpet, first of all. Well, I guess it's actually the only reason I have to say. Okay, so then we pass. Okay, so letting that Council Judgment resolve was pretty easy after I drew so many land. So I think that's pretty clear. Alright. So they actually didn't get around to replaying the library until 2 turns later because of the Teferi. At which point they've already taken an additional 3 damage. And also started getting, like, pretty seriously behind on board. So I thought letting that resolve was really good. I mean, I knew I had a backup Teferi, and I didn't really care if one of the other permanents was voted for instead. So this choice, that was a choice, and I did it because this is the one turn for which, or I mean, it's the most pressing turn for which Plague Engineer goes from being, like, kind of shitty normally to, like, oh, it's actually really good. Like, I kill a 2-1, I steal half a card from my opponent by dealing 2 damage to them. Like, that's better than it usually is. Whereas Teferi is still better than Plague Engineer in this case, but Teferi is always going to be good, and Plague Engineer is unusually good this turn, so it's like time to take advantage of a good deal. And then, actually, because I did that, my opponent ends up having to Swords the 2-2 just to preserve their life total. Okay, so we see this coming out. I haven't drawn Drake yet, so at this point I'm kind of sweating it, like, oh, I don't have Drake, I don't have Recruiter, I don't have Apparition, no Jailer. So, like, am I actually going to be able to cleanly answer this? Maybe a Karakas or something. So Swords is not that clean of an answer because of that Sylvan Library. Okay, so now had to give up the Yorion, which I felt like things were getting a little dicey, and then Teferi drew into Teferi, which is okay, I guess. So at this point, I'm no longer really trying to choke my opponent on mana, so I just do, like, whatever's convenient for myself. I'll, like, consider how much they have, but they have enough, probably. Okay, so this time I forced it because now it's evident that actually this library is going to be the same library is going to draw like 5 cards. Because now I can see clearly, like, I'm playing Palace Jailer uncounterably this turn, so I'm not going to be able to use it to grab the Uro. So Uro's still going to be there, my opponent's going to have a ton of life, and at the same time I don't expect Uro to go critical, so they'll have like 22 life. So then is it worth countering the Sylvan Library this time? Yeah, I would say so. So even though I ultimately ended up countering the Sylvan Library, it wasn't evident that I should do so until the game developed this far, and there was no way to predict that I can see. So I think so far no mistakes have been made. And then I draw the sword, so then it's like, oh, good. Now this is a real answer for Uro because my opponent doesn't have a Sylvan Library anymore. No, I won't be doing any top 8 matches today. This is round 8. Okay. Right. Okay. Uh-huh. Okay, this was a real decision, and I didn't spend long on it because I understood at this point, like, okay, time is actually a significant resource this match, and I didn't want to spend it, so I just kind of guessed, like, okay, force a will. But actually, so I don't really regard it as a mistake not to have thought about this, but if I had more time and I was thinking about it, I would actually think that I've swords 2 Uros, and decking my opponent has become a serious consideration. On the other hand, spending my mana efficiently is also important when I'm the Monarch and I'm going to have like 2 cards a turn. So I think forcing this is a reasonable play, but if I recall, my opponent actually used this as bait to then follow it up with Narset, was it? Oh, Sylvan Library, okay. So it kind of didn't work out, but I think it was okay. Okay, so Jace dies for sure. I mean, even if they have the Shark, it would die, so... So I try to buy 1 more turn of damaging them, plus 2 draws. And that Jace, I mean, it's gonna live, but it's, like, under pressure, so I think it's fine. Oh, actually, yeah, I forgot I did that. I actually bought a lot of time for the Sylvan Library, so that's why I was willing to sacrifice my last Teferi to do so. Okay, so I think now, now the game takes a decisive turn. Yeah. So at this point, I'm now thinking, okay, so now the plan has changed, and this is what I was talking about at the beginning, about how you need to be open to a variety of endgame situations. The plan was value for, like, the first few turns, and then the plan could then morph into, like, a Teferi Venser end of game block while you deck them. It could morph into, like, a sort of, you sort of, like, bleed them out as you're accruing value more quickly than them. It could be, like, a strong lockout where you just have Soul Herder and nothing they play ever resolves again. Or it can be something like this, where they've used their 1 Council's Judgment twice, and they and you have a Vial at 3, so bouncing is not considered removal for Peacekeeper. So then they used 3 swords, so they have 1 more. So you just name swords, and you name Peacekeeper, and how will they ever get through? So actually, Peacekeeper can even be good against control in certain situations. So knowing I'm going to do that, I just swords the Shark right away. Just in case, like, something bad happens, I guess. I still want to have, like, a faint idea of a plan going along some other strategy. Okay, so the question at this point is, my mage has been forced, so does my opponent have their one last swords right now? So the answer is no for a long time, and then I end up drawing 2 cards a turn for a while. Notice that because I'm playing Yorion, I win instead of lose. If I had 24 cards, I would have lost here. The Teferi Venser lock is just, your opponent can't... You have Caracas with it, too. So your opponent can't ever remove Venser because you have the last say on everything. So then you just keep their spells away forever. Like, you can't keep a Ponder away forever because they can just replay that a bunch of times, but you can keep, like, the big spells away forever. So at this point, we're both, like, frantically trying to save time, and so I start, like, auto-knowing to the Aether Vial, and I actually eventually have to cancel all my auto-anythings to set it to 3, so that it would be operative for Peacekeeper. But for now, I wanted it at 2 because, like, just diversity. Like, maybe I draw a Prince or something, because this isn't lethal yet, right? So Prince is still good. Prince would, like, protect the Peacekeeper, and I would just have to take 5. That's fine. My opponent's a Monarch. Good, they die faster, right? So, I'm not worried about that yet. And actually, later on, I pick a fight over Teferi, which I think may be wrong, but I wasn't really thinking very hard about it. We'll stop there when it gets there. So this is easy to let resolve. In fact, like, maybe it's good so that I don't deck myself or whatever, I don't know. But my opponent's not even looking for cards, which means that it was actually, like, casting this and then not even using it indicates that they just don't have anything anymore. Which means that the Teferi they actually have left, they consider as not an answer to this. Which is, I think, true. So the Fibblethip draw would be skipped anyway, so that's why I didn't play it. Okay, so should I respond to this? So if I just, like, say whatever, let's say my opponent had, like, actually some weird one of, like, or maybe, let's see, what would a reasonable weird one of be? Maybe they have the Second Council's Judgment, or maybe they have a Terminus, which they actually do. They actually have that. So I think that it's still right, because once this resolves, like, I can Apparition it, but if we're thinking I need to remove it, maybe it's better to force first. Actually, maybe it's better to just let it resolve, and then if they bounce Peacekeeper, I Vial it back. If they bounce Vial, then I tick this one up, so then I cancel all my automatic stuff. I tick this one up, and then I replay the other Vial, the one they bounce. So if they do that, I would first respond by eating the Teferi, and then accepting the Vial back. Then I take this up, and it acts as defense for another Teferi or Jace against Peacekeeper. So that's actually perhaps a better strategy here, because getting in a counter war over this made it so that my opponent was able to cast all their Force of Wills, and then that made this lethal so that Prince was no longer an acceptable defense for Peacekeeper against some weird single target removal, or weird any kind of like removal, not just bounce. So that's kind of the logic here. Like, Prince is only good for as long as this amount of damage is not minus, like, the biggest one is not 20. And by getting in this counter war, it got it pretty close. So then, or if it wasn't over. So I do think this was actually like a mistake that I will never use again, because this exact situation is just like so non-reproducible. But I do think it was wrong in my haste to get in a fight over this. I think I should have just exiled it with Apparition. The bounce doesn't do anything, and the forces could be delayed so that way princes could intervene first. Anyway, that's not the path I took, so we get in the counter war of this. Yeah, so then my opponent now has more than... they actually have only 16, so I guess in the game I was also pretty... trying to play pretty quickly, so I didn't notice, like, oh, this is not lethal, so actually it's still okay to use Prince. Okay, so that's kind of like what I was hoping for, I guess. So at this point, I think my opponent's fate is sealed. This is the last turn when they could do something, and I think to have given them that turn was actually also a mistake, now that I'm looking at it. I should have not taken the Teferi away until it was clear that my opponent hasn't attacked yet. It didn't occur to me, now that I'm remembering what I thought about. I wasn't thinking like, oh, what if my Peacekeepers bounce? And I don't know why I wasn't thinking that, like, it's kind of obvious, but it's just like, I had a lot to think about, so I didn't think of that. Yeah, so that was a mistake. It gave my opponent actually an unnecessary one last window to do something. And now that I've drawn this, that's when I want the Vial to go up to 3, because now this is like a repeatable defense against removal. I'm actually a little confused why my opponent flipped Terminus, so I think I missed it this time, because I had the auto set up and I forgot about it. I'm actually a little confused why my opponent eventually flips Terminus, but does not use it, because they did not know that I had Baron in my hand. So to them, it could potentially look like actually Terminus is good. Like, they just have to recreate all of this, right? But that's better than being locked out. So I'm actually not sure why Terminus was not cast for its miracle. If my opponent is watching this, this would be an interesting thing to have explained to me. Actually, he gets several chances to cast Terminus, and still chooses not to, so I can't say I completely understand that. I would certainly be curious what makes that the correct play. Maybe we were just both under time pressure, so we both were just kind of just like doing whatever we could. Oh, I only noticed just now that Meddling Mage joined the back rank. I think that's a function of how I have the board set up. Meddling Mage is a land. Oh, never mind. It's not anymore. Okay. Oh. It's like indecisive if it's a land or not. So here I named Teferi Time Raveler, which is also another mistake. I probably should just name Terminus just so that this whole drama here doesn't even matter. Because Teferi's not even responsive, so I don't know why I named Teferi. It was just... Okay, were there any more significant choices in the next 3 turns? Let's just... Yeah, so chose not to play Terminus again. So yeah, it's harder to click through Vials than it is to click through... Vials and Peacekeeper than it is to click through a Sylvan Library, so it's to my opponent's advantage here to make me play this out. So that's why we play all the way to when my opponent actually decks themselves. I just realized, actually, my opponent could have said yes to Sylvan Library, right? And then put a card back, right? Did I? I don't think I did. No, I don't think so. That was such a... Oh, that's such a weird thing to think about. I mean, I could have stopped that with Fencer, and I could do so uncounterably if desired, which I would desire. So, so it didn't actually matter. But that's just so funny to me. Oh, is that... Yeah, that's over. Okay. Okay, so in Game 2, you'll see that a bug ruins Game 2. So there's not much to discuss here, if I recall. That's pretty simple. Countering that is not simple, but I thought it made sense to do because I pitched Meddling Mage. Yeah, Meddling Mage sucks. So here, for everyone to see, is the bug. So this should actually... my opponent's right to note that at this point it didn't appear to them like... or at this point, it didn't appear to them like the game was over if it worked properly, because they don't know like what else I have. But what was supposed to happen is my opponent goes to 6 at the very least, and I draw an extra card. And then I was supposed to grab the Drake, giving me like this 2/2 that leaves the battlefield and makes a 2/2. So I grabbed the Drake first, so that way the 6/6 definitely connects to turn off the library. And then after that, I would have an uncounterable Palace Jailer for free. So, but because of what actually happens, which is this. So my opponent sacrificed a permanent under my control. Yeah, that happened. So I just decided, okay, if that's how this game works, like I don't have time to try to seek like any sort of rectification of this situation. Like, I scoop. So I scoop. And then I complained about it to MTGO afterwards. So because of that, we're now playing this game 3. That is a bug. For absolute sure. Not only is it a bug because I know it's a bug, but also it's a bug because Wizards knows it's a bug. But if you would like to understand the rules behind it, the word sacrifice is a keyword in Magic that means that a player instructed to sacrifice a permanent sacrifices that permanent if they control it. So you can't sacrifice your opponent's stuff. That's why you don't have like if you have a carrion feeder or something, you can't sacrifice your opponent's zombies. Some things have more flexible wording, if you want to call it that. Like, its controller's its controller sacrifices it. So, like, if you steal something from Sneak Attack, then, like an Embercoal, you don't sacrifice it because Sneak Attack reads, at the end of your turn, you sacrifice it. But if you steal... so Animate Dead says when Animate Dead leaves the battlefield, the creature it enchants controller sacrifices it, if I recall. Make sure I'm not lying. So, Animate Dead. That creature's controller sacrifices it. So even that's, like, evidence in and of itself. Like, why would there be this awkward wording if anybody could sacrifice anything, anyone's stuff, right? Like, if I could sacrifice my opponent's Animate Dead creature, then why would the game need to say something awkward like the creature's controller sacrifices it? Just say sacrifice it. But sacrifice is something that only pertains to something you control. So that's why this awkward wording is required. Hopefully that makes sense. Correct. So when my opponent is asked to sacrifice Uro, they will not be able to sacrifice Uro. So another important thing in this... so there's like two ingredients to this ruling. One is the definition of sacrifice, so we've gone over that. And one is the definition of how controlling a trigger works. So the way trigger's controllership is determined, and also you don't own a trigger, so the way a controller of a trigger is determined is if the trigger comes from a source, then the controller of the trigger is equal to the controller of the source at the time that the trigger was put on the stack. So the trigger comes from Uro, and Uro was controlled by my opponent at the time that the trigger was put on the stack, so my opponent controls the trigger as well. So anything that says "you" in the text of Uro's trigger refers to the controller of the trigger, not the controller of Uro at the time of resolution. Because the trigger is its own identity whose controllership is determined at the time it's put on the stack. Yeah, so that's why that worked that way. Be right back. Okay, so yeah, we're playing this extra game here with both of us low on time, but me especially low. Okay, so that was an explicit play around Carpet. I'm showing my opponent I have Wasteland because I think it's more valuable to not lose to Carpet. Again, letting Sylvan Library resolve. Okay, maybe I think some justification is in order here, if I can even think of why. I don't remember why I did this. So, why did I play more into Carpet this turn when I could have played a second Wasteland? Was it because... I think it may have been because I wanted to be able to cast Baron off the lands already in play in case I drew a Karakas. Maybe that was the reason. Because I don't... That decision is... I doubt I glossed over that, even if I was trying to play quickly. So yeah, I think that was probably the reason. So I actually get back to basics here. So it's interesting that it lined up, because normally back to basics is not that effective, but here I absolutely have to counter it, so I do. Okay, so I noticed that my opponent's stuck on white, so put back some extra lands, make sure that resolves. So I knew I would play it before the Summon Library trigger anyway, so I might as well play it on my turn. Okay, so I think that sequence is actually worth explaining more. So here, there was like a serious read that my opponent had Ice Fang Coatl. They had the 3 snows, they didn't do anything, and if they don't, even if it's not a read, it's still like, if they don't have that, this is too much damage. So like, I'm definitely assuming they have that. And if I don't do this during my first main, then actually I cannot attack with the Hull Breacher. So my most important commodity in this time-limited game, pressure, would be reduced by the read that my opponent has Ice Fang Coatl. So actually, drawing this enabled me to get rid of that. And now Ice Fang Coatl isn't even that good, because now that my opponent's forced to reveal it, I can make them actually do it and give me a treasure. And they skip the draw. And I can still attack with this right here. So, now why did I take the Uro? So, admittedly, part of that is because I forgot that this is an artifact creature. Okay, so let's say I remembered that. Then what would I do here? If I take the Wilt... So... Yeah, I would have taken the Wilt if I knew that. That would have been better. That was a definite mistake to not take the Wilt. My opponent was probably wondering, like, why didn't he take the Wilt? That was really obvious, but no, I just wasn't doing a very good job. So Terminus costs 2 white, so I know this is totally safe. So at this point, I'm starting to finally breathe easier, like, oh, okay, this isn't going to be a problem anymore, I don't think. Because riding on this match was not just my tournament life, but also, like, I was 6-1 at this point. But also, it would have been really tough to accept that when I finally stringed together a performance that was in contention for top 8, it was ended by it would have been ended by a bug that I told Wizards about. By now, actually 7 months ago. I think I probably would have not been able to play for a while. So luckily, as shameful as that is, luckily the result of the tournament was not changed by that bug. So actually, during the match, my opponent expressed some uncertainty too, that it should work the way I said. So it's not like a commonly known thing. Whoops. Okay, so this last one is against Depths, and it features some plays that I would like to analyze for myself and for everyone else who's watching. in games 1 and 3, I think, are where the significant choices are made. By the way, notice this pattern where I tend to disagree with other players about like using Brainstorm like effectively, meaning for maximum card filtering, because there's also mana that's like it enters into the equation. Like if I don't Brainstorm on turn 1, then I'm wasting 1 mana. If I don't Brainstorm during my main phase on turn 2, I'm wasting 1 mana if I draw Aether Vial. So generally, I think a whole entire resource like mana is more important than the abstract resource of like card quality, maybe. So that metric might change when that evaluation might change if you're like playing a different deck. But certainly, I can at least say that for Esper Vial, usually I fire off Brainstorm. There have been times my hand was like, this hand sucks, but it has Brainstorm, so then maybe it doesn't suck more than having 6 cards would. And then, so like you have 6 lands in a Brainstorm or something. Like, if you do keep that, then you're not going to fire off Brainstorm on turn 1. That's actually so bad that I might even just mulligan that. But, like, let's say something more reasonable, like 5 lands, a Brainstorm, and, like, a Meddling Mage or something. Like, that's a snap keep, because, like, on average, it's just going to work out. But if it's not snap in, like, it's really good, but it's snap, like, this is obviously better than 6 cards. So the problem with that, though, is you don't want to Brainstorm on turn 1 when you have that much trash in your hand. So then, in that case, you can make an exception. And you can say, like, well, I'm not going to Brainstorm turn 1, and I guess I won't even do it on turn 2 because I'm going to play Meddling Mage, so I'll Brainstorm on turn 3. That's fine. Because if you don't agree to that, then you will either flood out or you have to mulligan, right? So sometimes it can make sense to go for card quality on Brainstorm, but you need like a very good reason why you would do that. Oh, hello. Hi, Callum. So here was also a significant decision. I chose to force without paying any mana because I feared Daze. And I was hoping my opponent would fight back because Force of Negation is so bad that actually I sideboarded out. So I was thinking if my opponent forces back, then not only will I have not played into Daze, actually I get to play this card 1 for 1 when it shouldn't really do anything. So I was hoping for that, but my opponent saw through it, like, no, you can't use that trash card in your hand, so I didn't. And in fact, I so couldn't use anything that I just, like, wasted 5 mana, so that sucked. But I don't think there's really any realistic way I could have dealt with that. So here is also a significant decision. I could have played Baron, and that would have been fine. Or I could play Gilded Drake. I think it would seem like a little out of sequence. I don't care what it seems like to my opponent, but I mean, like, I think it strikes me as not really a reasonable play to play Baron before Drake. And Drake would also have the benefit of being protected by Force of Negation. Another possibility is just I'm at a high life total. I play Meddling Mage, naming Death's Shadow. And then after that, like, maybe that's enough to get them to force me. Then I can play Gilded Drake, right? Because that's definitely the more important spell here. This is a high priority target for Gilded Drake, and I have the repeatable combo to steal already in my hand. So if this resolves, then and it doesn't get pushed, the game's probably over. So there was an argument for that. I kind of went with the intuitively plausible line here of just playing the Drake. I thought they would have fought me harder for the... Wait, where'd it go? What happened? Are we still watching the same game? Oh, right there. Okay, it's just shiny. I thought that they would have fought me for Death's Shadow if they could have. And I am a little surprised that that was not true. Because, I mean, I was kind of half joking they saw through the Force of Negation, because the reality is that they shouldn't really think I have it. I already pitched one. We both understand that Force of Negation sucks, so I would definitely select against it as I'm brainstorming. And the fact that I already even had one after 2 brainstorms, like, I don't think they should put me on having a second one. So they couldn't have not fought back because they didn't want to give me a chance to cast Force of Negation. So why didn't they fight back? Is that reasonable? So, they could have also not fought back because exactly they feared that I would have Gilded Drake. That's possible, but a good answer to Gilded Drake is just having more than one threat, unless it so happens that I also have a Gilded Drake promoter like Baron. So maybe they were worried about that. That would be interesting. I'm not sure how I should factor that in. So yeah, maybe it's not like a slam dunk that they don't have Force of Will. And with my high life total, I think that I could have given a little buffer to like assume that my read was not necessarily 100% correct. And the play to do so would be casting Meddling Mage first. But if my opponent is like reading me like that, like, oh, he has Gilded Drake, so I can't even fight over the namesake of my deck. So I have Force of Will, but I'm not going to protect Death's Shadow. I don't think that such a person would also Force of Will Meddling Mage, right? So that's unlikely to help as well. So what would help then? Probably nothing. I think the play here is just to slam Gilded Drake and hope they don't have both Force of Will plus Daze. Now, especially having exiled Daze, I'm thinking, oh, okay, so probably it's good, but then it's not. So I still get to use Force of Negation for some good effect, but this was not the outcome I hoped for. Okay, so here, this right here, instead of naming Death's Shadow, is because I did not know my opponent was playing Snuff Out. So, without knowing that, then what this looks like is my opponent cannot remove anything, and I'm going to have Peacekeeper. Because they do have Brazen Borrower, but their damage is not lethal, so then they can't kill me all in one shot. And their damage is also blockable, right? So it's not that I need to lock them out for every single turn. I just have to not take, like, 3 separate attacks in a row where I can't, like, block any of it or something like that. So, so at this point, I sort of said, let's go for the lockout strategy. And even if not, this is also a productive way to race, right? So that's why I did this. My opponent should have cast Death's Shadow at several points in this back and forth if they had it. So that's why it was not important to name Death's Shadow. Whereas a removal spell was never useful until now. So yeah, that Snuff Out was a big surprise. And the choice not to waste is because my opponent has Daze and they have more than enough mana to do everything in their deck except for cast Snuff Out without paying life. Which they already did, so I'm not going to waste them to like try to prevent that again. So at this point, I'm relieved. This is played around Daze number 3, but not around Force number 3, so, or Force number 2? Yeah, Force number 2, so, that didn't work out. So then it comes down to one last turn where, I actually didn't quite know what to do here. Okay, so, unfortunately, the nature of playing Magic Online is that you have to be, like, almost omniscient. Like, if I didn't think about this ahead of time, like, I now have notes in my log saying to be careful about this exact situation. But if I didn't think about this ahead of time, how should I know I'm going to draw a Palace Jailer? Like, normally, in paper, you'd go like, oh, I drew Palace Jailer. Okay, where are my draw step? Okay. And then your opponent wouldn't have anything to say about that. Like, that's how things normally go. Like, you're allowed to not automatically pass to your main phase, even if you don't say so until you've looked and studied your draw. So the right play here was actually draw step, waste, And then play Palace Jailer. If days number 3, then don't attack for 4. Just attack for 2. And if not days number 3, then you win. And if in response to wastes they play Brazen Barber, then you jailed that. So the only way that line loses is if the opponent has both days and Brazen Barber. So that's pretty unlikely, so that's the best line. And besides, any other line here would lose to them having both of those relevant cards. The Peacekeeper line, where you don't do any wasting at all, dies to Brazen Barber because they bounce it. Because in the Peacekeeper line, you are for sure attacking. Well, okay, let's consider also a Peacekeeper line where you don't attack. What about that line? In that case, actually... Okay, so actually that line is considerable. So what is not considerable is what I did. That makes no sense unless you just know, like, it's because I didn't know to put a draw stop. So now I'm dying to days because I did it in my second main, as became necessary after I couldn't waste my opponent off of Brazen Barber in the first main phase. So after I saw my draw, I was like, oh, damn, okay, I guess I need some stops in my combat phase. Like, I didn't understand that there was this alternative that really should have happened, where I could have avoided this. I just understood, like, where we are now going forward. I have a choice to make, and I need to get them off of Brazen Barber mana before I can cast Palace Jailer. So then, unfortunately, I had to make my attack decisions before knowing whether Palace Jailer would resolve, as a result of the non-draw phase stop. So, non-draw step stop. So, this was pretty suboptimal, but my opponent didn't have days number 3, so that didn't happen, luckily. So, now let's consider the other line. So among Peacekeeper lines, there's variability in how many Wastelands I activate, and that's about it. Oh, and how many creatures I attack with. So... let's see, is that line better? So, if you play Peacekeeper, I actually now think it doesn't make sense to attack with both creatures, because then you lose to Brazen Barber. So, you just attack with one creature, and then you waste them twice in your end of combat, do you? Or do you waste them 0 times? So... I think I would definitely not waste twice, actually, because then next turn when you play Palace Jailer... Oh, you can't even play because you need to pay Peacekeeper. So you don't have the white mana to both pay Peacekeeper and cast Palace Jailer. Huh. That's also an important limitation here. So then you're both drawing a card in turn. They probably draw a Delver at some point, and then their Brazen Barber's live, but that's like a 2-card combo. And they need to still flip the Delver. You can also draw Force of Will to protect against that. You can draw Meddling Mage to protect against that, so it's not very likely to happen. To my intuition, it's really hard to do the calculation between these two complex trees, like which one's going to be better, but they look to be about the same. So either of the optimal versions of either way, like either I Peacekeeper, and then it doesn't really matter how many times I waste them, or I probably would want to do it 0 times, because that way I can at least play expensive blue and black spells. So yeah, Peacekeeper, waste them 0 times, or Draw Step, waste them twice, Palace Jailer, are the 2 optimal lines. I mean, only one of them is exactly optimal, but are the 2 lines that aren't like easily, strictly dominated by some other variation. So only those 2 lines could possibly make sense, and I think they're about equal. I can't resolve them, at least. Oh, thanks for the raid. You could still Wasteland him in your main phase and go to combat phase. Yes. Yes, exactly. Your third comment is exactly correct. I'm gonna cast Palace Shelter, then attack. Because I missed the draw step stop. Another Mage Fatal Push, and then Drake. Another Mage Foul. Because if you play Battling Mage, you want to be able to follow it up with Baron, but would that be good? Would that be good? Let's say I did do that. Then would I name Force of Will, or would I name Fatal Push? I think I already named Fatal Push at that point, so I guess Force of Will then. Yeah, because this is still here, and it's been the same mage the whole time. So, yeah, was that play better? Yeah, I think so. I think I probably should have done that. Because I have time, I can take 3. And then all my remaining pieces are played around days. Yeah, I think that was actually better. So, okay, so back then, I should have protected my Drake more. And then after arriving at this point, I should have wasted my draw step so that I could play Palace Jailer in the first main. See that it resolves so that I know it's safe to attack for 4. Okay. And then, yeah, my opponent resigned after none of this stuff that we're considering actually mattered, but it's definitely wrong that we did not play around those. Yeah, so, I mean, I actually did consider, I think, naming Force of Will in that situation, but I think I let it get too much to me that I also had Force of Will. And I think that was a little irrational. Okay, did I mulligan this game? I forget already. Oh no, that's a keeper. So, this game was looking like it might be kind of a mana situation, but then I drew the 3rd land, so now it's, like, really safe. But you can see there was a game 3, so something bad happened, and I guess I'll be reminded what it was. So I think I get stifled here, so that's the first bad thing that happens. So, first of all, how did I decide even to activate that fetch? So, in my mind, Death Shadow is a very low-to-the-ground deck, and off of 2 lands, it is not asking a lot for it to afford to hold up 1 land to stifle me forever. So the idea of holding a tension between my fetch land and their 1 mana was not as appealing as it is for Temur Delver. Temur Delver has more threats at 2, and in some cases even 3. And so it's like really hard for it to hold up stifle. So if you just like play fetch land after fetch land, and they're like, okay, go, 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 then it doesn't really help them much because you're actually just getting to your late game for free while they're trying to hold up stifle. But with Death Shadow being much lower on the curve, especially because I didn't even have proof that they wouldn't make further land drops, right? So if they have a 3rd land, then holding up stifle is like totally free. So I thought, in that case, if holding it up, if I'm able to approximate as though stifle costs 0, then in that approximation, there is no reason not to activate the fetch land right now. So that's why I did it. Ah, yes. That's what happened. Right, and then I ended up having trouble with colors, actually. I almost never name Ponder. Okay, so here I kept Underground Sea and I put Gilded Drake on the bottom, even though Gilded Drake is effective against Gurmag Angler. And the reason I did this is because I regarded Liliana as a greater threat. I didn't see a sequence where I would cast Gilded Drake, steal this, and still be walled out. and then after that, so then it goes to 6. Sorry, it goes to 6, I cast Gilded Drake, still be walled out, and then it goes to 7, and then I have to, like, hope that a Skyclave Apparition, or maybe Swords to Plowshares or something like that, resolves, which I only get one shot at, because this can only be white if it's non-basic. So I get one shot, so if it gets forced, then everything just goes to shit. So, so I didn't want Gilded Drake to be my next draw. But I did think, like, okay, well, if I keep it on top, it's still a known card on top, which almost always is advantageous if I have a fetch land, because I can choose whether to have it or not. But the problem is twofold. One is this could be stifled. And two is that, if I will... sorry, no. I was about to say two is that I would have to sacrifice this to make a second white, but that's not a drawback because that would be equivalent to putting it on the bottom. So the one reason is, if this is stifled, do I want to draw Gilded Drake? And the answer to that was definitely no, because then I have no way to do anything with the Gilded Drake. So I absolutely do not want Gilded Drake if this fetch land is stifled. So I put it on the bottom. Put the land on top so that way I play around Daze when I go for the Skyclave on Liliana. Okay, but there is a better play here. So I saw this as like a chance to get out of this. Like, I can get rid of both of these and then start attacking Liliana. So this was actually a surprise. I didn't know my opponent had this at all. And it wouldn't have mattered if I tried to... Even if I, like, somehow knew that, I don't know how I would. It wouldn't matter if I decided to make this one last stand turn a Skyclave Apparition instead. Because I have 3 cards in my graveyard. In fact, if I knew that, I would rather make the play I did, because maybe this draws me a second Swords or something. So that was actually a sequencing error right there. I should have attacked first, so that my opponent couldn't force or do anything to Baleful Strix, and at least they wouldn't know about it while deciding what to do about combat, so that was out of order. So now that I'm watching, I realize I made, like, about 5 mistakes, and I only really understood that I made 3 of them as the tournament was going on. And then I ended up, like, actually not remembering them, and thinking last night that I made 1. So, it definitely wasn't perfect, that's for sure. Okay, so at this point I'm just seeing, okay, does my opponent know to sacrifice Liliana, or are they going to greed me? Because I actually have a second Skyclave. Nope, they know to sacrifice Liliana. So now I'm thinking, okay, I'm now chumping to try to get a Peacekeeper lock. And then that starts with me drawing a land, and I didn't draw a land, so I resigned. Okay, so our last match, our last game of the day. So this was tough to accept. The alternative is always a 6-card hand, so you have to think about that. But this is not good. Meddling Mage is not one of the best cards against this deck. And knowing that my opponent doesn't have any Delver, Plague Engineer was like... You know, I don't have that many sideboard cards for non-Delver Death Shadow. So Plague Engineer was like, okay, 3/3 Death Touch that kills Brazen Barber, if that even exists. We haven't seen it yet. Okay, 3/3 Death Touch, that's pretty good against all of these ground fatties. It's better than Force of Negation, I guess. And then you kind of say the same thing for Mage, like, okay, this probably gets traded up by Fatal Push or Snuff Out, or Dismember. And so I'm not actually going to get away with naming Death Shadow, I'm just going to lose 1 mana, so this kind of sucks. But at the same time, this deck does have Thoughtseize. So, like, just having 7 cards is so much better than having 6 cards. So, keep. And the mana's not going to be, like, too bad of an issue. So, it looks like it's definitely in the keep territory, but it's not something to write home about. So, actually, I understood here I was playing into Daze, but I regarded it as kind of unlikely that my opponent would daze. And so I didn't play the fetch land first, because I didn't want to commit to playing a fetch land that couldn't get white without being a non-basic. So I'm not exactly sure if this is correct, but having done this, actually, the fact that my opponent would daze it was actually very revealing. Death Shadow should only do this if they have no further land drop. Because if they had another land drop, getting to 2 mana is important. This deck does not function well on 1 mana. Like, you'll be playing Magic, but you're going to be like 1 cantrip a turn. Okay, finally I got to 12 life. Okay, Death Shadow on like turn 5 or something. Because with just 1 land, best case scenario, you start at 17. And then maybe you cycle a Street Wraith or something. And then you have to take a turn off to like Thoughtseize your opponent. Okay, 13. Maybe you force something. Okay, finally 12. And then you can play Death Shadow. Like, that's really slow. So your opponent's definitely not looking to be stuck on 1 land for long. And over a Brainstorm, they're willing to go back a turn? That would only make sense if they're not actually going back a turn because they expect to miss their next land drop. And I realized this at the time, but I make a choice later that I'm not sure is correct. Okay, so playing the same land again, that sort of is consistent with my theory. So at this point, I have a chance to... Yeah, it is very similar. At this point, I have a chance to name Stifle, which is actually a card that I've never named with Meddling Mage that is good to name, because Stifle is incredibly opportunistic. And so you just need to have it be named at the moment when it would be useful. And then after that, even if they remove Mage, like, it's already -1 because they don't have a chance to use Stifle again. So that's a case where Meddling Mage is, if you name Stifle and you prevent it at the one moment when it matters, then that's actually similar to like a 2/2 that ETBs and Thoughtseizes your opponent. As opposed to something more like Scholar, where you give back the card after Meddling Mage dies. With Stifle, if you hit, the card's gone forever. So I was thinking about that in terms of card advantage, and perhaps even winning the game on the spot by if my read earlier was correct. And I did not consider that the snuff out I saw from Game 1 could make this turn really ugly. What I did manage to consider is that even if my read is correct, and I name Stifle and nothing bad happens, like there's no snuff out, because I didn't think about that. So the waste goes off. I would be stuck on mana almost as much as my opponent. I can't grab Yorgan, I can't play Plague Engineer. These don't take mana. And then I can cast a second Meddling Mage. Am I supposed to be attacking my opponent? Like, what if they draw a land and then slam Daze back up Death Shadow or something like that? Like, should I be... What should I do? So, in the moment, it didn't... And even now, wasting didn't seem like a good idea here. Especially now knowing that actually Snuff Out is a real possibility. I think that wasting is a bit foolish. But that's when I'm not exactly sure, and I wonder what the chat thinks about this. So I'm going to go get a refill while people offer opinions. So we have read our opponent is stuck on 1 land. So what's also possible is our opponent has a different opinion of when it makes sense to Daze Brainstorm. And then I do this like name stifle waste them, and they're like, well, I have another land. Why'd you just do that? And then I not only look silly, which I don't give a shit about, but I also am in a disadvantaged position. Because now I named a card that's, like, useless. And I guess also that would mean they don't have it. So it's both useless and they don't have it. And then I'm stuck on 2 lands, while my opponent has, like, at least 1 more land if they were lying to me with their Dazing Brainstorm. So then, like, how am I supposed to ever deal with something like Death Shadow or something? I didn't name it, so, like, should I just die? Thank you. Oh, thanks for the raid. So yeah, I think it was right to not go for that play here. So instead I named Death Shadow. And since my opponent probably didn't actually have it based on what I saw later, okay, so now, so they actually did have the stuff out. I didn't remember that. So actually, I would have been totally fucked if I went for that, because I think they actually had the Stifle. I don't remember. So at this point, they played Brainstorm, and I didn't force it even though I had that read, because I understood that if I forced it, then they could daze me back. Which would be, like, not a great exchange for them, but certainly better than getting locked out of the game. So I just wanted to see, and I was still thinking, like, there's also the possibility that my opponent does not agree with me, that it was nonsense to daze the Brainstorm unless they were about to miss their land drop. So, so I wasn't quite ready to 2-for-1 myself to back up my claims. So I just allowed it to resolve, but then I got the confirmation. So then now it's a simple matter to make sure you do it first so that they can't daze to protect themselves. And then you actually play Plague Engineer first because you have solid Meddling Mage mana, so you just want to get on the board. Make sure you get both on the board so that your opponent dies as fast as possible. Make sure you fetch while your opponent can't stifle. Make sure you name Death Shadow because that's the only thing that gets them back. So double force protection now. Clock is not that good, but it doesn't really matter because my opponent's not doing anything. So I fetched this Tundra here because I knew that at 5 life my opponent can no longer afford to play Wasteland. So I wanted to be able to play both Skyclave Apparition and Jailer, I guess, and also Baron. And Venser, I suppose. So it goes to 1. Okay. I heaved a huge sigh of relief when that happened, because that was, I haven't been in the top 8 of anything for a while. Like, just, it's hard to be in top 8, especially at these large events. So that was like a really emotional moment for me. Actually, more emotional than winning the event, because after winning the event, I was just like so exhausted. I didn't really feel all that much. I felt a lot, but I felt more when I made the top 8, actually. So this was like a huge relief. And then top 8 began almost like within a few minutes. So there was not very much time to breathe and reflect on any of my choices, which is why only just now, even though I like kind of combed through the matches that I thought would have lessons in them earlier, even now as I comb through them again, I'm seeing like, oh yeah, actually there's a mistake here and there's like another mistake there. So yeah, there was a lot to learn for me from watching this replay, and hopefully for you as well. I'll try to make this available on my YouTube. So thanks for tuning in. Please follow this channel if you'd like to see more. Unfortunately, the next time I stream will be probably my last for a while, which is Fenris Cloud, Sam asked me to be on his stream for Esper Vial versus Infect. So that'll do, and then after that, I'm going to be busy with a variety of things. One of them being preparing for this event as a file. Well, I guess if you need it as a file, you can get it off Twitter, right? Like save it as a... Oh, no, you want a text file? No, I don't think I have that as a text file. You could... it won't give you my list as a text file, but if you would like sideboard plans, my Patreon has them. But like I said, I won't be creating much content really at all for the next few months. So I will probably be a bit out of touch with Legacy for a bit. But I may play in like some events here or there or something like that. But please follow this channel if you'd like to see more Legacy content when I have time in a few months. And if you would like to see sideboard plans, they are available on my Patreon. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Yeah, I guess you'll just have to do that. Oh, right, yeah, you could also wait for when Wizards actually starts posting lists again. Yeah, thanks for tuning in, and hopefully this analysis was helpful. So everyone have a good night, and I hope to see you soon.